Joining me in studio now, in her cardigan, guys, is Judith, political analyst. Judith, always lovely to chat to you and your cardigan. I can't believe it, but you've been living in Cape Town for years. You're used to this intensely hot weather.
That's right, Sally, but I'm not in Dan Moyani's three-piece suit, so there you go.
He set the bar very, very high. He certainly has. You know, Judith, you and I chatted this time last year, and I don't know if it's just me, but it feels different. What feels different to you about this year, if anything?
Well, it feels different, Sally, in the sense that South Africa is in a real sense of crisis. If you think about, I wrote a piece for the Daily Maverick this morning about the real meaning of the word crisis. That, and we won't, you know, in the Greek, it's a point, a turning point, a moment of sieving, a moment of decision making. And we are living through unprecedented load shedding. We're also living through an uncertainty within government. And what the presidency itself last week called a crisis of confidence. And this is coming from the horse's mouth, so to speak. So it's not as if we're the only ones feeling it. So this year it feels a little bit flat. It feels a little bit as if a lot of the, you know, you see the red carpet behind us, that feels out of touch. And so I'm hoping that tonight the President would have read the room, and he would have read the fact that citizens are simply sick and tired, and we are waiting for bold decision making. And so it feels a little bit muted out there, but of course, Sally, what always happens on this day is that the people are absent because people leave town because those in power come into town. It's a sad reflection, I think, of what this day is supposed to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it is a year of action, we're told. This time last year, the speech made by the President was reflecting the reality that Parliament had burnt down just a month before. We were emerging from COVID. The President was committed to getting us out of our state of disaster from COVID as soon as possible. I think it took a few months after that. And here we are a year later. Things have arguably got worse in terms of our economy, certainly worse in terms of our power supply. And we could be facing another state of disaster. What's your sense, Judith, since the ANC came out, what was it, over a week ago now, saying, look, we broadly are in support of this, and Cabinet said the same sort of thing. Do you get a sense that that's going to be on the agenda tonight? Do you think it's something the President might actually address?
Well, I certainly hope not, because I can't for the life of me fathom why one would want to plunge us into a state of disaster now that we've just come out of a COVID disaster. We saw all the ramifications of that, and I don't think that it's something that one, in terms of the act, would trigger lightly. And I'm hoping that President Ramaphosa knows that. But of course, it is symptomatic, I think, Sally, of a government that has run out of ideas, that a party that has run out of ideas, one of your main solutions to a crisis of energy supply is to declare a state of disaster. All that does really is really bring about an infringement of rights, and I don't think in a democracy we should do that lightly. And one hopes that the President, with his legal background, would understand the full ramifications of that. As I said, we've just come out of one. And so really the issues here tonight are about the economy, but linked to that, the energy crisis and issues of infrastructure. You know, we talk about Eskom, but we also need to talk about Transnet, about what's happening with rail. And, you know, if one were advising the President, one would say, keep it simple, because people are tired. They're weary of listening to promises, empty ones.
Absolutely. And also, if we go back, I looked through and I listened to his speech from last year, and he was saying all the right things. Listen to this. He said, when power cannot be guaranteed, when water quality deteriorates, companies are reluctant to invest. Economies cannot function properly. On electricity, he said it's one of our greatest threats to progress. Load shedding continues to have a huge impact on the lives of South Africans. Aging power stations, poor maintenance, policy missteps, state capture. And he goes on to say that we have a shortfall of about 4,000 megawatts of electricity. I think it's significantly more than that now. He says during the past year we've taken firm steps to bring new power online as soon as possible. Goes on to mention, bid window 5 and 4 and this and that. Gas and power proposals requested, opening the way for municipalities to generate power. So my question, I suppose, is this a government that is very good at diagnosing the problem and pretty darn useless at fixing the problem? Or is this such an intractable problem that it just takes a long time to sort out an electricity crisis that, let's face it, has been decades in the making?
Sally, so I think there are a number of truisms in what you've said there. So, yes, it is a government, and I guess as South Africans, we're all guilty of, we're very good at diagnosing the problem, but, what happens now what? But on the electricity crisis, I think that nobody is, and I've also written about this 2 weeks ago, nobody is expecting President Ramaphosa and even Minister Mantashe to solve this problem overnight. But what we are expecting them to show is a degree of empathy. So when we hear that ministers, for example, have 24-hour power supply while the rest of us is sitting in darkness for 10 hours, it doesn't inspire our confidence that this is a government that really feels people's pain. And so tonight, I think what we want is a speech of not only the head, but a speech of the heart, because the majority of South Africans are suffering. And so when we talk about the energy supply crisis, there's not going to be an easy solution. We're in it it's a long haul problem, and those solutions are not easy to come by. But we do know that if there is intent, for example, on opening up the grid, on those bid windows, on acting, the President talks about projects in the pipeline, for example, in the 32-page, very glossy document that was put out this week by the Presidency on progress from last year. And there are lots of ticks, and then there are blanks, for example, on battery storage power and so on. And one wants to know why, and one wants to know what the slowness is with regard to bringing on some of those projects, taking them out of the pipeline and into action. So that's what we want. And at some point, this timidity, we know, is because there is a difference of opinion between perhaps the presidency and the party about what this just transition actually means. And if you read the document by the Daniel Minele and his crowd on the just transition, the investment plan, the money that other countries, our developed countries, are pledging to us, there's a lot of opportunity in that. Opportunity for incentives, opportunity for pivoting towards a green economy. But we are obsessed with coal. 80% of our generation is from coal, and 200,000 jobs. So we need a nimble government, one which is intelligent enough to understand the problem, which there are people in government who do, but to take us forward. But the President is so stuck in a fealty towards his party that he seems unable to take the bold decisions that he needs to, even though he comes from Nazareth strengthened. So it is, at what point does that timidity of his presidency not become an undermining of his constitutional obligation to act in the best interests of the Republic, is the question we need to ask, I think.
Do you think he needs a radically reshuffled cabinet to get the job done?
Of course he does. There is a lot of dead weight in that cabinet. For starters, there are two women in his cabinet, Lindiwe Sisulu and Nkosazana Dlamini Zulu, who have repeatedly undermined him in public, in the open. They cannot be trusted. He cannot have them in his cabinet. Gwedi Mantashe is a problem. He is a powerful problem. He is powerful within the party. The President owes him some political debt, a considerable political debt. And so, will he be bold enough to shift him? Because he is a real stumbling block to being able to open the conversation. He speaks with a forked tongue on renewables and on the just transition. And that is not helping us. So we're not expecting our problems to be solved overnight, Sally, but what we are expecting is a government with honest intent and a government that is going to act on some of the things that it says that it will, and not at the snail's pace that we've seen this year.
What is your view on the role of the opposition? You know, we've seen various political parties come up with their sort of alternative State of the Nation address, and as you say, we're all very good at knowing what the problem is. We have seen some very bold moves in the city of Cape Town, the DA-run city, really moving quite quickly to allow people by mid-year to start selling back some of their excess power to the municipality. We've seen the DA this afternoon saying, well, we're not dressing up for today. We think it's completely inappropriate. We know that there's a very good chance that the EFF might do some of those sort of shout-out protests that we've seen in the past. Beyond that, what is your assessment of the role that the opposition needs to be playing at a time like this, and are they fulfilling that duty?
Our democracy is at a turning point, Sally, and so democracy around the world is at a turning point, and so all around the world in established democracies we see challenges. We saw the United States, the State of the Union address yesterday. Joe Biden was heckled by right-wing Republicans. It's an unpleasant spectacle. You see the rise of China, you see demagogues like Vladimir Putin flexing their muscles, and South Africa cozying up to that. But so all around the world, democracy is under threat from a kind of authoritarianism that there is. And so the question is, what do we do here in this weakening environment where the state is so weak, and where the 33% unemployment rate on the narrow definition, the country is ripe for extreme levels of protest, and it's incredible that we managed to stay. You know, the president talks about a social consensus, and there's some consensus within the society which views the government as one to be criticized but still legitimate, and that's important. But the opposition, so the opposition, the DA is a sort of traditional opposition in terms of, how do we use parliamentary rules, using the legal methods and so on. It did a march with regard to ESCOM, and that was a source of controversy. I think as much as the ANC is in a parlous state and falling apart, the opposition also has to ask real questions about how it is responding to the crises. Again, sometimes head, not always heart. And the DA has very particular problems, given its history, with regard to race, with regard to whether John Steyn is in fact the right person. I mean, I think that there's a very interesting brand of kind of mayor in the DA, Jordan Hill-Lewis here in Cape Town, Chris Pappas, who are very interesting, Mpoma Palazzi, but she was ousted. A very interesting kind of next generation who are less encumbered, I would say, by past DA politics, and I think that is positive. But of course, the opposition has that role to play to hold the ANC to account. But I think that we haven't talked about the EFF, for example, their role. It will be interesting tonight to see what Julius Malema does. Is he going to disrupt because of Phala Phala, or has he got his eye on the prize of 2024 and Kingmaker? And so he will be very interesting to watch. We've seen how coalition politics, which I'm afraid is in our future, that we have just shown the immaturity with regards to that.
Big learning curve there, let's put it that way.
Big learning curve, and also in many times undemocratic outcomes that we've had to deal with, for example, in Johannesburg.
Yeah.
And so, but Sally, I think the point that what we also have to look at is the broader forces within our society, which are what I call the countervailing forces of power. So that is the opposition, it is civil society, it is protest action, it is the courts, it's all of those things which I think we have to be harnessing. And it is time, I think, for a much bigger conversation in South Africa about who we are and where do we want to go. It is not the ANC that is going to take us there.
Yeah, absolutely. I have someone who's fiddling down my back. Such is the nature of live television.
The band is playing on, Sally, so
let's have a look at him. This gentleman has been helping me. He's just left. As you say, such is the nature of live television, having comms pack put down my back. Yes, it is at an interesting time. You spoke about crisis, and every crisis holds within it an opportunity. It sounds trite, but it's also true. It strikes me in many ways that South Africa's character, and maybe we're talking not even just this modern democratic era, but even during the apartheid years, was to live in a state of crisis. When will this awfulness end? Always living on the brink. And in my darker moments, I sometimes think, is that our character? Are we always going to be living on the edge of chaos? Or are we going to actually break through and become quite a stable, boring country at some point?
Switzerland.
Yes, exactly.
So the answer to that short answer would be no. I think it's not in our DNA. I mean, as Yaki Salir said, who was a former colleague, we're always at 2 minutes to midnight here. But we don't have to permanently live in this state of crisis. I think the tragedy of South Africa is that, you know, you read the document on the just transition, you read what's being written, you look at...
It's all there.
It's all there.
The
And
seeds
they're
are there.
brilliant people who are able to implement this.
Exactly.
But they're not in government, mostly.
Yeah.